Okay, we were in Matthew 6 this week, verses 19 to 34, and the title of the lesson, I have to tweak it. I've pastored for 30 years preaching sermons. You got to come up with better titles than one-word titles. So I've entitled this Torn Between Two Treasures. So if you grew up in the era I did, you probably recognize the song that I'm playing off of. But anyways, that's what the text really is presenting. It's presenting two possible focuses, or priorities is the word the lesson uses, that one can base their lives on. But you can't focus on both and be effective or be pleasing to God. And the text really presents this idea in three different ways. First of all, you got two types of treasure. Those treasures are then described as two different masters, and really it reflects two different types of people. A person who's focused on this life, that's what they're living for, and then a person who's living with eternity in mind. And unfortunately, as Christians, we're not always living with eternity in mind, not very consistently. And so I think we really need to press our people a little bit, because I think there's an application here, several applications that we need to hear about how we how we use our time and our money, and what we're really living for. So keep in mind, teachers, just a little teaching moment here, that you want to get the main point across. I just described to you what it is. But often we get so caught up in the individual phrases, and the lesson will highlight certain phrases and certain verses. And although it's important to walk through the meanings of those things, sometimes we can focus on those things to a point where we don't really present the main point of the lesson. And a lot of times what they describe in the curriculum as the key doctrine, either the way they word it or even what they give isn't always the main point of the text. So for example, the key doctrine, they like to use one word. One word does not convey the meaning very well. So they use the word stewardship. Now, yeah, stewardship's in this, stewardship's involved in this, but that's not the main point of the text. It's kind of a sub point, if you will, because the main point is, what life are you living for? What is your treasure? What are you seeking for? It's how you're pursuing things. And stewardship, good stewardship, is going to be involved in seeking first the kingdom of God, laying up treasures in heaven. But I don't think stewardship alone is how you want to describe the main point. So make sure you kind of boil that down and put that in front of your people. Page 3 presents a decent discussion question, but once again, they put this discussion question at the very beginning of the lesson. You haven't even covered any verses yet if you're going, through the lesson as it's laid out. So make sure you have covered verses 19 through 20, or better than that even, verses 19 through 24, before you discuss the question of does, and I don't have it in front of me. Because I tweaked it and changed it a little bit, made it more specific. So I'll give you that in just a minute. But the question on page 63 is, do you agree or disagree that misplaced priorities fuel debt? A lot of these questions are softball questions. I mean, how can you not answer that correctly? Here's a better way to ask the question. Does credit card debt indicate one who is focused on earthly treasure? Now, that may not always be the case. Someone might just get in a really bad way and whatever. But overall, I would say that credit card debt, and what I mean by that is debt you're not paying off every month, but you actually have a revolving credit card debt. That would be someone who's focused too much on the things of this world and doesn't have their finances in line with what they should be. Luke chapter 12, verse 21 through 34 is a parallel passage to this passage, and in Luke's arrangement, it's interesting. He puts this instruction right after the parable of the rich man who built bigger barns, even though he would die that night. And that's kind of the point, isn't it, of the first part of this text in Matthew 6. Randy Alcorn writes, when Jesus tells us not to store up treasures on earth, it's not because it might be lost, but because it'll always be lost. You can't take it with you. So verse 19, 20, do not store up. And another question you might want to ask here is, does that mean it's wrong to save? If we're not supposed to store up money, or if you will, treasures on earth, does that mean it's wrong to save? Of course, the answer to that is no, because keep in mind, Luke conveys the point a little more succinctly in Luke 12:21, where he says, "So is the man who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God." So in other words, normal saving to anticipate extra expenses down the road, or retirement saving, there's nothing wrong with that. However, it is a problem if that's all we're saving for, and if we're not being rich towards God, we're not giving towards the work of God, we're not giving towards those in need, which I'll share a verse later in this passage that Luke makes very clear. That's part of what laying up treasure is all about. So being rich towards God, this is where our stewardship comes into play. It's where priorities come into play. Then you get to verse 22 and verse 23, and a lot of times these verses can be a little bit of you wonder kind of how they fit or what exactly is being said. The eye is the lamp of the body, so then if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? Well, again, always think about the context. What is the context about? The context is being focused on eternity. A person who doesn't have the things of this world, material things, being a master to those things, is someone whose eye is clear. It's full of light. He's focused on the light. He's living for the light. The person whose eye has evil or darkness in it is someone who's focused on the things of this earth. Remember what 1 Timothy 6, I believe it's 6:10 says, the love of money is the root of evil, all evil, or as the NASV translates it, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. So when we make material things too important, then we are going to have an eye that's not clear, an eye that's not full of light. Page 65 has an application point. Believers should focus on heavenly treasures rather than worldly possessions. Again, I try to make that more specific and ask maybe something like this. How do we go about storing up heavenly treasures? We're told to store up heavenly treasures. What does that mean? Well, your first answer is probably going to be like witnessing and winning people to Christ, which is certainly one way. Being obedient, you're going to get a lot of general answers, but as I've already said, Luke in his account gives us a very specific answer and links this idea to being generous with our money to the poor. Luke 12:33, sell your possessions and give to the needy. Provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, with a treasure in the heavens that does not fail. So he connects the treasures in heaven with giving to the needy, sacrificial giving to the needy. Remember, this whole passage is about money. It's about laying up treasures in heaven instead of earth, investing your life and including your possessions in eternal things. And then verses 25 to 34 is all about not worrying about money, not worrying about physical possessions. So we cannot limit laying up treasures to just spiritual activity that doesn't involve possessions. This whole passage is about possessions. So speaking of verses 25 through 32, I just kind of summarized all this into 5 principles from this passage that basically provide us with reasons why we shouldn't worry. Shouldn't worry specifically about money. Number 1, worry demonstrates an earthly, short-sighted focus. If you're constantly anxious about money and thinking about money, then there's something wrong with your relationship to money, and you have a short-sighted focus. And kind of maybe a different way to say it or think about it, it demonstrates that we've lost sight of our ultimate purpose in life. Our ultimate purpose in life is to live for God and not to, be living for these things. Secondly, God's fatherly love and care for you, verses 26 and verse 32. If we understand that concept and apply it well, then we shouldn't be anxious. We shouldn't live an anxious, worried life because we've got the greatest and richest and most generous Father there is. Number 3, worry will not change your situation. It will not change your situation. Number 4, worry is an enemy of faith and an insult into God's character. That goes back to God being a father. That's verses 28 through 30. It's an enemy of faith and it's an insult to God's character. So make sure you look up these verses that are tagging along with these principles. Number 5, worry characterizes the life of an unbeliever. These are what the Gentiles seek. This is what they live for. Not a child of God who's living by faith and who understands again that God is their Father. Matter of fact, this is the first passage in Scripture, not the only one, but the first one that speaks of God in terms of a Father. Discussion question on page 67. What are practical things you can do to get through times when you have little faith in God? So I'm just going to throw out 3. The first one is, maybe not the most important, but do some bird watching and think of this text. When I'm sitting outside having breakfast or whatever and the birds are flying around, I think of this text all the time. Secondly, pray, casting all your care upon him, for he cares for you. And also another practical thing is learn how to budget your money, learn how to handle your money better. A lot of people struggle with money issues and anxiety simply because they don't know how to handle money well. They don't know how to budget, they don't know how to stick to a budget, they don't realize how much waste they have in their spending. So those are some practical things. Some quotes about worry. I should have had this earlier, but listen to these quotes. First one by John MacArthur. It is an amazing and ironic truth that ours is perhaps the most affluent and comfortable society ever. It is also the most stressed out, worried, and anxiety-ridden one. Isn't that the truth? And then this one is from Toby Mack. Worry is worshiping the problem. Wow, hang on to that one. So anyways, I hope these things help you out. I hope you have a great class, and we'll see you on Sunday.